Dieses Ding hier, ich weiß nicht, was das soll, ne? Warum macht Nintendo das? In Amerika gibt es einfach alles. Alles. Du kannst ja den geilsten Scheiß einfach aus dem Baumarkt kaufen. Wunderschönen guten Tag zu dieser neuen Live-Reaction hier auf dem Kanal. Und ich bin über diesen Kanal hier gestolpert vor kurzem. Der macht mega geile Projekte. Selbst nennt er sich. Und der hat mich von seiner Präzision für mich als Deutschen komplett überzeugt. Aber das Video wurde mir tatsächlich noch nicht vorgeschlagen. Und er baut sich hier wohl seine eigene Switch Pro. Wie er das macht, weiß ich nicht. Keine Ahnung. Er hat hier die Switch OLED in der Hand. Das heißt, wenn er die verwendet, muss er die ja mod-chippen, sage ich mal. Oder er baut was komplett Neues. Wir werden es auf jeden Fall sehen. Ich habe Bock drauf. Lasst uns reingehen. Ich vergesse es aber auch immer wieder, ne? Tut mir leid.
This is my Nintendo Switch OLED, and I happen to think that this is the worst version of the Nintendo Switch that you can get. Here's why. When the Nintendo Switch first came out in early 2017, unbeknownst to the engineers at Nintendo, there was a critical security vulnerability built right into the hardware. Now, these types of security vulnerabilities aren't that uncommon. Eventually, hackers found it, exploited it, and in successive generations, Nintendo had to slightly tweak their hardware design in order to prevent said security vulnerability. My Switch
Jetzt muss man aber das. Okay. Ja, in dem Betrachtungswinkel ist das natürlich die ollere Switch, weil die andere kann man einfach Software modden. Aber die ist mittlerweile auch modbar. Nur da würde ich mich niemals rantrauen. Das ist so filigran, was man da einbauen muss.
Switch OLED happens to be the latest revision of hardware, and as such, it's really hard to hack into. However, if someone were to acquire a launch version of the Nintendo Switch, like this one right here, well then, there are some pretty crazy hardware and software mods that you can do to this thing
Alter,
to get it to do some pretty crazy stuff. A hacked Switch is an overclockable Switch. I've been playing Tears of the Kingdom on my Switch OLED lately, and while it's a great game, in certain situations, the game can turn into an absolute slideshow. The frame rates are horrendous. So today, we are going to fix that by creating our own custom high-performance version of the Nintendo Switch. And we're also going to unlock a whole bunch of new functionality on it, and, you know, do a fun little building project along the way. So, how exactly do you hack a hackable Switch? Well, it's a good question, and sorry. No, I don't want my car's warranty extended. No, I don't want my air ducts cleaned either. Ugh, I hate these damn robocallers. And you know what? Today's sponsor might actually be able to help with that. Incogni. Did you know that your personal information is being sold and traded online without your consent? Yep,
ja, leider.
That's right, and it's a big part of the reason.
Also, dass Daten online verkauft werden, sollte mittlerweile jedem klar sein, aber schwierig.
Why you're probably getting spammed with robocalls just like I am. Incogni can help fix that. It all starts out simple enough. You sign up for an online newsletter, or maybe you register for the loyalty program at your favorite retailer. No big deal, right? But before you know it, your inbox is flooded with spam and your phone is ringing off the hook. So,
habe ich auch. Ich habe mittlerweile meinen Hotmail-Account seit den 90ern und da kommen halt so historisch betrachtet komische Mails rein, sage ich mal, ne?
How does that even happen? Well, it happens because data brokers get a hold of your personal information and then start selling it to marketers, spammers, and, well, just anybody who's willing to pay for it. The good news is that you can request that data brokers delete your personal information so they can't sell it anymore. The bad news is that there are literally thousands of them out there, and that's where Incogni comes in. They've created an automated system to help protect your privacy by reaching out to these data brokers on your behalf and requesting the removal of your personal information. Just sign up for an account, tell them whose information they'll be requesting the removal of, grant them the right to work on your behalf, and they handle the rest from there.
Okay, das ist natürlich mega geil, weil ich kriege jeden Tag so viele Spam-E-Mails. Die Frage ist nur, ob das funktioniert. Ich weiß, es geht nicht um dieses Thema, aber das ist wirklich mal ein spannender Sponsor, finde ich.
Really streamlined and really easy to use. Take control of your personal information and your privacy by visiting incogni.com/stackbuilds. The first 100 people to use the coupon code ZachBuilds will get 60% off their Incogni subscription. I'll put a link down in the video description. And now that we've got those annoying robocallers taken care of, we can focus on the important things in life, like building custom overpowered game consoles. Okay, where were we? Hacking your hackable Nintendo Switch. The first thing you have to do is press the volume up button, power button, and then the home button. But not this home button here. There's actually a hidden home button inside the right Joy-Con rail. If you have a steady hand, you can actually do this freehand. However, most people suggest 3D printing a little jig like this one and then folding a wire into it. So this just goes in here, presses that button down, and now all I have to do is hold volume up and tap power. This should put the Switch into RCM mode. From here, we can use an exploit to push custom firmware onto the device.
Das ist halt erschreckend einfach. Es ist so erschreckend einfach, wie die Original-Switch umgehbar ist.
I'm going to be installing a new OS called Atmosphere that really unlocks the Switch. This part is a bit boring and tedious, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I will include a link in the video description to the same guide that I used to get this all set up. Hey everybody, Editing Bay Zach here. I just wanted to add a quick addendum that Nintendo has been known to ban hacked Switches from online services. So if you're going to follow my footsteps, you do so at your own risk. That being said, Nintendo generally only bans people for doing really egregious things like using your hacked Switch to cheat online or to do obvious things like set your profile picture to something other than the ones that they normally allow. If you want to play it really safe, just make sure that when you're using a hacked OS, you keep your Switch.
Das könnte auch das Last of Us Fenster sein hier. Fehlen nur noch die Gardinen. Aber ja, gehackte Switches könnten theoretisch ausgesperrt werden. Laut meinem Informationsstand hat das aber wohl keine Bewandtnis mehr, weil die Custom-Firmware gar nicht mehr online geht oder so, sondern man spielt halt die Updates manuell ein. Und man kann die Switch immer noch im normalen Betriebssystem starten. Die ersten Switches, ja, das sind halt die Early Adapter, ne? Wie immer.
Switch in airplane mode, and then if you want to play online, you can revert back to the normal one. All right, let's get back to it. Don't be alarmed, but Atmosphere OS looks basically identical to the stock Switch operating system. We can do all sorts of fun stuff, and we're going to cover a lot of that a little bit later in the video. But for now, the thing that I'm most interested in is overclocking. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, basically what it means is forcing the Nintendo Switch to run faster than Nintendo ever intended it to run.
Und wie viele Tests mittlerweile rausgestellt haben, kann der Tegra X1, der da drin verbaut ist, auf vollen Taktraten laufen. Selbst mit dem Standardlüfter, der da drin ist. Keinerlei Sorgen. Aber natürlich geht das auch auf die Akkulaufzeit.
The effect is improved performance across the board, including faster load times and improved frame rates, which, in theory at least, should solve all of the issues that I'm having while playing Tears of the Kingdom. The downside is that the Nintendo Switch is going to generate more heat, and it's also going to use a little bit more battery. So, how are we going to fix that? Well, first, we have to tear down our Switch.
From the factory, Nintendo does something a bit weird with these consoles. The NVIDIA Tegra X1 SoC that powers the Switch is actually underclocked. If you got the same chip in a tablet or a phone, it would run significantly faster. Nintendo forces it to run at a slower speed in order to extend battery life and to keep the Switch from getting too hot.
Und sie wird nicht zu heiß. Also er sagt ja gerade Battery Life, also das heißt Akkulaufzeit. Und sie wird nicht zu heiß, auch nicht mit den Taktraten. Das hat man mittlerweile jetzt schon in vielen Tests rausgestellt.
So, the very first supporting mod I did here was to remove all of the stock thermal paste and to replace it with some newer, higher performance stuff. These pastes tend to dry out and degrade over time, and given that my launch Switch is almost 7 years old, it was definitely due for a refresh.
So, the changes we've made so far...
Immer eine gute Sache, Werbeleitpaste auszutauschen. Ist natürlich hier... Also allzu kompliziert stelle ich mir das tatsächlich nicht mit der vor.
Will probably net us a small increase in performance. That newer thermal paste will wick away heat a little bit better, but it's not really going to get it to the level that I want it at. In order to take things up to the next level, we are going to replace the original Switch backplate, which is made out of plastic.
Und vor allem das beschissenste Plastik, was sie jeweils verbauen hätten können, was nach, keine Ahnung, 3 Wochen Handheld-Use schon kacke aussieht.
And we're going to replace it with this one that's milled from a solid block of aluminum.
Ooh.
The nice thing about aluminum is that it conducts heat.
You see where I'm going with this, right? We are going to turn the entire back of the switch into a big heatsink, allowing the SoC to more easily vent heat out into the rest of the room. And in order to make that actually work, we're going to need some K5 Pro. A lot of people seem to think that this stuff is just a thermal paste, but it isn't. What it actually is a very thick thermal interface that can be used to bridge gaps and transfer heat between two surfaces without any mounting pressure.
Okay, also das Ähnliche, was viele beim MacBook machen. Aber man muss auch sehen, wenn sich die Hitze natürlich hier weiter verteilt, dann wird auch der Akku wärmer, ne? Also gut, den kann man auch irgendwann austauschen, aber ja.
And while it might seem counterintuitive, having this metal heat spreader sandwiched between two layers of K5 Pro can actually aid in heat transfer. Plus, I noticed it's shaped in a way that helps duct air towards the fan and the heatsink, so keeping it is a win-win. The last step was screwing the aluminum backplate in place and completing the thermal bridge between the SoC.
Aber ich wusste nicht, dass es Aluminium-Backplates gibt. Das wäre mal ein nices Upgrade, weil dieses Plastikding da hinten, ey.
And the outside environment.
So now, with our new backplate in place, we have a much larger surface area with which to dissipate heat, which should really aid in cooling. And as an added bonus, the back of the Switch is now metal, which makes it feel more premium and just kind of nice to hold.
Wie bei der OLED. Es macht so einen Unterschied, wenn man die beiden Konsolen in der Hand hat.
But I'm sure many of you at home are now thinking, yeah, that's great, Zach, but all you're doing is taking the heat and dumping it into the back skin of the device, where it's just going to be kind of uncomfortable and hot to hold. And you're right, but I did think about this. So the next thing we have to do in order to fix that is to disassemble a Switch dock.
I might be out of line in saying this, but I think the engineers at Nintendo have some serious trust issues. In order to disassemble this dock, and the Switch itself, I had to buy a special 3-wing screwdriver bit. Seems a
das
bit...
ist dieses Ding hier. Ich weiß nicht, was das soll, ne? Aber es bringt doch gar nichts. Du kriegst die Dinger mittlerweile überall zu kaufen für ein paar wenige Euro. Und warum macht Nintendo das? Vielleicht sind die Schrauben da ein bisschen stabiler oder so, aber nimm doch einfach Kreuz oder was weiß ich hier. Nicht Imbus. Ihr wisst, was ich meine.
Overkill, but I guess they didn't want people to figure out that their docks are mostly just wasted space. More on this in a second, but while I was in a disassembling mood, I decided to fix one of the biggest issues that plagues the Nintendo Switch.
Einfach nur Kunststoff,
stick drift. You see, the analog sticks that come with your Switch from the factory rely on brushed metal contacts to detect their position. These contacts wear out over time and lead to the dreaded stick drift phenomenon, where your Switch will start registering phantom directional inputs. To correct that, I installed these Hall effect sticks that rely on a series of magnets and sensors to detect their position.
$37, Alter. Für 2 Sticks. Aber dafür gehen die halt auch nicht mehr kaputt, ne? Hall Effect ist ja klar, reibt sich nicht mehr ab, ist magnetgelagert.
They look nearly identical, but they should be more accurate, use less power, and importantly, should never wear out or develop stick drift.
So wow, you look at that, there is really not much to the Switch dock at all. There's this PCB and this springing guy. The PCB handles power input, and then it also breaks out the HDMI and a couple of USB ports here. And then that connects to the springing guy here, which is basically just a USB-C port that plugs into the bottom of the Switch that connects everything. So now at this point, I think what we need to do is rebuild the Switch dock from the ground up.
And in order to do that, I booted up Fusion 360 and started carefully measuring all of my components. The biggest change with my dock is that it will feature active cooling courtesy of this 80mm Noctua fan. I actually kind of wonder if Nintendo had plans to do this themselves at one point, because the Switch will overclock itself ever so slightly when it's placed in its dock. But by the time we're done...
Na gut, also erstmal zu 2 Sachen, zu der Platine, die er da gerade rausgeholt hat. Damals war das echt krass, dieses Umschalten, ne? Das war für damalige Verhältnisse echt krank, obwohl das nur so eine kleine Platine da drin ist. Das andere Ding ist, gut, dass sie keinen Lüfter drin haben. Brauchen sie halt nicht. Das ist halt wieder der Vorteil, wenn du den Chip untertaktest, ne? Lüfter stauben ein, Lüfter werden lauter oder das Lager rattert irgendwann. Also von daher gar nicht so eine schlechte Entscheidung. Das Einzige, was ich damals gemacht habe, ist, einige kennen vielleicht das Video aus Anfangszeiten noch, dass ich so eine kleinen Schaumstoffpads in die Station geklebt habe. Dann hat die Switch nicht mehr gewackelt und der Screen konnte halt nicht verkratzen, weil das war am Anfang auch ein Problem.
Done, we are going to make that look like small potatoes. So, for the next few days, I plugged away at this project by designing pieces in Fusion, printing them on my 3D printer, and then comparing them against their physical references.
Alter,
I didn't make any
was ist das denn für ein
necessary
geiler
changes.
3D-Printer, ey. Guckt euch das mal an, Alter, wie krass das aussieht. Puh, Bamboo Lab X1. Ich will gar nicht wissen, was das kostet.
To the 3D model and rinse and repeat the whole process. I'm still pretty new to 3D modeling and 3D printing, so I learned quite a bit while doing this project, including this little trick.
So when you're building 3D printed objects, it's additive manufacturing. You're building from the bottom up. And when you have big overhangs, you need to add support columns in order to support those overhangs.
Okay,
but the problem is those overhangs can often become bonded to the main piece and they're really hard to remove. In order to fix that, I've used a small layer of support PLA. This is just an interference layer that sits between the column that supports the overhang and the overhang itself and makes it so that they don't bond together. This should theoretically make it much easier to remove all the supports on this piece, and I'm very excited to try it out because I think it's kind of neat.
As it turns out, the support interface worked quite well, allowing for much easier removal of the supports, but also, more importantly, nice clean surfaces where the supports met the model. With that little trick added to my repertoire, I was back to iterating on my design, and one of the nice things about 3D printers is that they function pretty much autonomously. So while my next couple of versions printed, I was free to work on a little problem that had been bugging me since the start of this build.
You see, we have to power the fan at the back of the dock, which should be relatively easy because this is a 5-volt fan, and that means that I can just plug it right into the PCB at the back of the dock. Plug this in here, and we're good to go, right? Well, not really, because it introduces two problems. The first one is that when the PCB is plugged into the wall with a power supply, these USB ports are always powered. And then the second problem is that this is kind of a bulky solution. It projects way out past the side of the dock, and this looks really ugly. But then I thought, hey, wait.
Okay, ich habe mich schon gewundert, wo der USB-Anschluss herkommt, aber er hat offensichtlich... Ach nee, das ist einfach ein Adapter. Ah, okay. Dann habe ich nichts gesagt. Ich dachte, er hat hier irgendwas umgelötet.
Wait a minute, I wonder if we can tap directly into this USB port. On the backside of these USB connectors, we have 4 pins, and one of these should supply 5 volts, and another one should be ground, and then the other 2 are your data pins.
In order to test my theory, I stripped 2 wires coming off of the fan and then simply held them against the pins. To my surprise, the fan spun right up. With my concept validated, I was ready to come up with a more permanent solution. I trimmed off even more wires to reduce clutter and then fired up my soldering station. I actually like these things so much that I bought 2 of them. If you want to get one, or really any of the other tools and materials I've used throughout this project, I've included links for everything down in the video description.
Ich würde auch so gerne löten lernen, ne? Ich glaube, man kann einfach so viele Sachen machen. Einfach auch so Sachen einfach mal reparieren und dieses Durchmessen und so. Das würde mich wirklich mal jucken, ey.
After I had the wires connected to the USB port, I wired a simple push-button switch into the circuit so that I can turn the fan on and off as necessary. I know this wiring is a bit messy, but don't worry, we'll clean it up a little bit later in the video. Once I knew that everything could be powered internally, I was able to completely redesign the part of my dock that held the fan and the PCB in order to make everything much more compact. And good news, if you'd like to make your own Switch Pro dock at home, I'm going to make all of these 3D print files available for purchase. There'll be a link for those down in the video description.
Zum Kaufen. Also er stellt sie nicht kostenlos zur Verfügung, aber immerhin kann man sie dann diese Muster hier kaufen. Ah, okay.
Well, with my design finally complete, I was able...
Und ich warte auf den Tag, wenn 3D-Drucker so schnell werden. Das wäre geil, aber ich glaube, da ist auch die Physik ein bisschen im Weg mit dem mit dem Kunststoff, was man hier verwendet. Wie nennt sich das? Wir hatten das so oft im Chat, aber ich denke mal, das muss ja auch eine Weile immer kühlen, damit das stabil wird, damit man noch eine Schicht drauflegen kann und so weiter.
To print the last round of drafts and prepare for an abrupt change in venue.
So, here we are at the shop. Now that we have 3D printed both sides of our Switch dock, we are now ready to do a little bit of woodworking. Some of you have no doubt noticed that I've left this little recessed area at the front of the switch dock completely empty this whole time. And that's because I wanted to leave a little bit of room for some shameless custom branding. And because it's me, we're gonna be doing it using walnut.
When it comes to engraving text, I like to use these V-carve bits because not only do they allow for a much higher resolution than a straight flute bit, but they also create a cool 3D effect with their chamfered sides. Once I have my custom branding done, which I hope Nintendo's lawyers see is obviously inspired by the Nintendo Switch's logo and not actual trademark infringement, I switched the bits and cut it out so that it would fit perfectly in the front of my dock.
Oh yeah, that looks sick.
Then I applied my secret weapon, black stain. Now, you might be thinking that this ruined...
In Amerika, ich weiß nicht, wo ihr jetzt sitzt, aber gefühlt, in Amerika gibt es einfach alles. Alles. Du kannst ja den geilsten Scheiß einfach aus dem Baumarkt kaufen.
The natural character of the walnut. And you're right, but just stay with me because I promise it'll get better. First though, I had to solve the problem of this piece of wood just being way too thick. So I sent it through the drum sander a bunch of times until it was exactly how I wanted it. Then on the last pass, I flipped it over and sanded off all the stain except for the stuff in the letters and on the sides, which helps to emphasize that cool 3D effect. Then, as a final step, I sealed the wood with a couple of coats of oil rub finish.
While we wait for the faceplate to dry, let's take care of a little job that I set aside earlier. This is the PCB and the fan, and we're just gonna clean up the electrical connections a little bit. The first thing I'd like to do is paint on a little bit of this stuff, liquid electrical tape. And this is, well, I mean, I don't think I need to explain what this is. It's like a horseshoe, it's right there in the name. Oh, that's thick. That is thick.
By painting this goopy stuff all over the exposed ends of the fan switch, I ensured that I wouldn't inadvertently short anything out after it was all packed away inside the case. And just to be extra safe, I put a couple layers of Kapton tape over the backside of the USB port where I stole the power for the fan.
Okay, so at this point, and you might be thinking that this is the perfect time to start assembling everything. And you're not wrong, however, there's one last thing I want to do on this project. You see, if you look at these two pieces of the switch dock, they might look remarkably similar, however, they are made out of very different materials. This half of the dock here is made with carbon fiber reinforced PLA. And this half of the dock is made with carbon fiber reinforced nylon. Again, they sound similar and they look similar, but they have some remarkably different properties. The carbon fiber reinforced nylon is more resistant to heat, it's more flexible than the PLA, and importantly, it's a lot stronger than the PLA. This I could probably break with my bare hands if I wanted to, like this is, oh yeah, you can hear it starting to crack. Not the strongest stuff in the world. This, on the other hand, well this, I don't mind just throwing across the room because I know it's not gonna break. It's really tough.
So eine Verarbeitungsqualität wünsche ich mir mal von vielen anderen Herstellern heutzutage, aber ich glaube, das liegt auch ein bisschen, ist natürlich am Ende alles eine Preisfrage, ne? Aber wäre manchmal schon geil.
Downside is that the nylon is much harder to print. I think I finally got the settings all worked out right now. So back in my office, I actually have two of these being printed right now. And hopefully I've got it all worked out and then we can do the assembly. Let's go see. Okay, well, that took a little bit longer than I thought, but I did finally get these last two pieces printed and I learned something really cool along the way. Oh yeah, get that out of there. You can actually use PETG as a support interface layer for nylon, and it actually kind of works better than PLA support does. Like, look at how easily these are coming away.
One important goal that I set myself on this project was that I wanted the dock to be completely serviceable. So that meant no...
Das wünsche ich mir noch, dass die Maschinen das wirklich so ausdrucken, wie du es erwartest. Und diese Dinger hier noch entfernen. Das wäre noch geil.
Permanent adhesives. And I think I achieved that, but it did have to go together in a very specific order. First, I connected all the electronics, then I pressed the fan switch into this little niche that I created for it where it just kind of clicks in. Then the PCB goes in and gets screwed to the back of the case. The fan is next, but doesn't actually sit all the way down in the case because it's going to function like an alignment pin for the other side of the dock. But first, I had to screw the springboard / USB plug into the bottom, and then I was finally ready to join both halves together with 4 simple screws.
Das ist ja so krass minimalistisch ausgemessen. Der Typ ist einfach so krank. Ey.
Okay. I think that's it. Oh, no, wait, the faceplate. I still have to do the faceplate. Whoops.
Okay, I lied. I guess I did need to use a little bit of permanent adhesive here, but just to bond the faceplate. And then I was ready for the ultimate test. See if it worked.
That little power indicator right there tells me that it's working. Now, let's do some benchmarks. Given all the additional cooling that we put in the base, I see no reason why we can't just crank these clocks on the CPU, GPU, and memory right to the absolute limit. And you can see that these are pretty significant increases over their stock values. Like I said before, Nintendo just plays it really conservative with these values from the factory. But at the end of the day, these are just numbers on the screen. So let's see if they actually make a difference in my beloved Tears of the Kingdom.
Das Ding ist, die OLED-Variante der Switch, da könnt ihr nochmal ganz andere Taktraten raufgeben. Ich glaube, da habe ich schon was von 2300 Megahertz gesehen oder so. Und die laufen trotzdem mit der Standardkühlung vernünftig, ne?
This game is well known to push the Switch well past its breaking point, resulting in both dropped frame rates and lowered resolutions thanks to the dynamic resolution tech that they use. So, theoretically at least, all of these mods should result in a game that runs smoother, looks better, and maybe actually even loads a bit quicker too. And based on what I'm seeing here, yeah, this is a lot smoother. Let's see if we can find something with the physics to test. Should I attempt? Oh, I missed it.
Das Spiel sieht immer noch so hübsch aus.
Let's throw up some stats on screen, and then we will compare it to some stats I recorded earlier pre-mod. So as you can see, it's a pretty night and day difference here.
Frames.
And these differences will extrapolate out to every game, not just Tears of the Kingdom. But what about temperatures? Am I running this thing right at its absolute edge? Well, not really. If you look down here, you can see the SoC is hovering around 50 degrees and the internal fan is barely even spinning. Truth be told, I don't even know that that fan that I added in the dock is actually necessary. I did some testing earlier where I turned the fan off and ran the thing, and while the SoC did get a little bit hotter, the internal fan was able to keep it in check by just...
Ja, aber ohne Lüfter. Ja klar, mit der Metall-Backplate und sowas alles, aber 58 Grad ist halt gar nichts. Das ist ja schon kühl, fast. Und mit Lüfter halt 51 Grad, ne?
Spinning a little bit faster. That being said, that added fan is nice insurance that everything will be kept cool and quiet. And externally, things are much the same. Using the thermal camera here, we can see that while the skin temperatures are a bit hotter, they're still well within spec. But what about handheld gaming? I think that's a little bit more of an interesting question. This Switch with its aluminum backplate is better cooled than your average Switch. So I think if all you were worried about was temperature, you could run this all day with a full overclock without any issue whatsoever. But we also have to think about battery life. So I actually went and configured a slightly more conservative profile for handheld gaming. It's still an overclock, but I played it a bit more conservative with some of the values. It's actually interesting. Tears of the Kingdom is much more dependent on memory clock speed, so I left that cranked, but then turned down the CPU and the GPU a bit. We're still getting a rock solid 30 FPS, skin temperatures stay in check, and if I had to guess, we're probably only seeing like a 10 to 20% decrease in battery life, which in my opinion is a perfectly fair trade-off. Now, before we get into the post-mortem
analysis, aber macht schon einen Unterschied, also 10 bis 20%, also da hat Nintendo schon nicht unrecht. Nur bei der OLED hätte ich mir gewünscht, dass man, naja, man könnte es ja theoretisch höher takten. Man bräuchte noch nicht mal einen neuen Chip verbauen, ne? Arbeitsspeicher ist Müll, der ist halt super langsam, aber bei der OLED da nochmal Taktraten drauf zu packen und schon hätte man die Pro gehabt. Naja.
Bonus features that I want to share with you guys. Because this Switch is hacked, well, it can do all sorts of fun things like run emulation, allowing you to play all your favorite retro games on the go or in the dock. I've got mine loaded up with basically every single Nintendo game that I own. If you're willing to go far enough down this rabbit hole, then you
jedes Nintendo-Spiel, was er gekauft hat. Klar.
You can do all sorts of crazy things like run a stock Android launcher on here and then start playing Android games or stream games from your PC the way I did in my Ultimate Gaming Phone video. There's a whole ton of functionality here that I'm barely just scratching the surface of, and I'm really excited to look into it more, but first I gotta finish Tears of the Kingdom. All right, now let's talk about what I could have done better in the post-mortem analysis. I think it would have been really fun to do a full aluminum body conversion, including the Joy-Cons in the front, but when I looked into it, it was really expensive. I also put some more intake vents on the back side of the dock to increase airflow. It does get the job done as is, but more airflow would have made it a little bit quieter and, you know, probably would have extended the life of the fan a little bit. Another thing that I noticed is that, well, I do love the look of this carbon fiber reinforced nylon. It is a bit rough to the touch, so I worry that it might scrape the switch after many, many in and out cycles. And then maybe, potentially in a second version of this project, I would include a second battery, just like I did in the Ultimate Gaming Phone video. That way, I wouldn't have to worry about the
Nintendo 64 gebaut. Oh, fuck.
Battery life, because I would have twice the battery life. If you'd like to make your own Switch Pro and Switch Pro dock, then check out the 3D print files that I linked in the video description. Thank you to Incogni for sponsoring this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Geil. Einfach nur geil. Und das durch so einfache, Sachen. Einfach nur Hammer. Ja, schaut da gerne vorbei bei Zack Builds. Also ich gucke die Videos sehr gerne. Das Switch Pro habe ich mir jetzt extra aufgehoben. Und das war noch eins der etwas simpleren Projekte, aber schon geil. Gut, das war's erstmal. Vielen lieben Dank für das Einschalten und wir sehen uns natürlich zur nächsten News wieder. Bis zum nächsten Mal und ciao.